The patrons have spoken, and they must have really enjoyed Bellatar's movie Ferrothorn's Tango, for they have requested another one of his works. This one is shorter, but remains uncompromisingly true to his grinding, punishing style, because here we present the Turin Ferroseed. Encountered by many for the first time in the black and white games while traversing Chargestone Cave, Ferroseed and its evolution were amongst the most unique, colorful Pokemon in a generation full of such additions, with their inspired design, color scheme, and corresponding never-before-seen typing. Today we'll be examining how the smaller Ferroseed fared in the competitive scene. Evolving into one of the best Pokemon of all time is not an indicator of success by any means, so this will be far from automatic. Let's dive right in. How good was Ferroseed actually? And in this video we'll be going over these competitive formats. Upon coming into existence, what was the first thing UU did? Well, actually, they spammed the ludicrously broken strategies that were initially allowed, such as Kyurem and Sun. What was the first thing UU did once the metagame settled down a little then? They looked to OU, saw the spiky durian that effortlessly dominated and defined nearly the entire tier, and they said, hey, we want one of those. And would you look at that? Ferrothorn did indeed have a pre-evolution. In fact, a pre-evolution with the same typing, ability, and move pool. As such, one could attempt to recreate the magic. Ferrothorn and UU, what a concept. Did it come to fruition? Well, of course, it wasn't going to be exactly the same. Ferroseed's reliance on Eviolite meant it wouldn't have the passive recovery of leftovers, and its pitiful attack stat meant it wasn't going to directly threaten opposing Pokemon in return. However, by and large, it was quite close to the Ferrothorn experience. Just like its evolution, Ferroseed used its absolutely incredible typing to superb effect, packed to the brim with amazing combinations of resistances. For example, resisting both water and dragon was invaluable in fending off the monstrously dangerous Kingdra. Its typing also provided it with a great dark resist, letting it stuff Sharpedo, and an ice neutrality, letting it safely sit on Empoleon. It wasn't a permanent wall, since it wasn't healing unless it used Leech Seed, though make no mistake, that Leech Seed was incredibly irritating to switch into. However, Ferroseed wasn't trying to be and didn't need to be a permanent wall. It staved off huge portions of the metagame, including big hitters like Snorlax, more than long enough to sufficiently support its team beyond just taking hits. It helped soften the opponent up with ease through spikes, sometimes even taking on the role of a team stealth rocker, as well as to free up a more threatening move slot on a teammate. This made Ferroseed an outstanding choice on offensive teams. It gave their threatening Pokemon a great backbone to fall back on against opposing attacks, while also effectively making them stronger through its reliable hazard stacking and even potentially healing them while weakening the opponent further with Leech Seed. That is, unless the opponent switched out to rid themselves of the Leech Seed, of course. But switching out would mean taking more damage from the hazards Ferroseed set. Win-win scenarios like these were actually of the Feral tribe. To make matters even better, Ferroseed matched up incredibly well against the tier's most common rapid spinner, Blastoise. And with a solid ghost type like Cofagrigus in the back, multiple hazards were all but assured. Plus, with its miserable speed ensuring it was always hitting with a max power gyro ball, Ferroseed could, in a pinch, actually do some decent direct damage. Of course, if it chose, it could also mess with the opponent and support its team through Thunderwave. Ferroseed has so much to offer and was a huge driving force in a great number of successful UU teams. Now, spiking competition in UU was fierce, so as good as Ferroseed was, its usage wasn't enough for it to remain in UU proper. In RU, on the other hand, Ferroseed established itself as legitimate a Pokemon in the tier as any other, because it was even better there than in UU. Its ability to so thoroughly dominate the water and grass types, as well as the popular rapid spinners that dominated the tier, was invaluable, using these switch-in opportunities to once again stack the spikes that boosted so many already dangerous teammates to unstoppable levels of threatening. Ferroseed took advantage of so many of the tier's most spammed Pokemon, including but certainly not limited to Alomomola, Kabutops, Cryogonal, and Sceptile, while its bulk, resistances, and Iron Barbs made it a good check to choice ban Dredagon's Outrage and Durant's Iron Head spam, actually punishing them for using these moves while helping its team soak them up. Furthermore, the Pokemon that could actually threaten Ferroseed, like Fire types, were none too keen to switch into Leech Seed or Thunder Wave, as that would hamper their overall use greatly. They'd be even easier for Ferroseed's teammates to take on. Plus, those Pokemon didn't love the entry hazards Ferroseed stacked in general. It was a perfect blend of turning defense into offense, and so Ferroseed was an amazing, defining piece of Gen 5 RU. Ferroseed had a solid role in the Little Cup metagame of its debut generation, especially as the addition of Eviolite meant a bulky, passive damage-centered metagame, the kind Ferroseed's toolkit was essentially built for. Even in Little Cup's most ferocious metagames featuring threats to later be banned like Mischievous, Murkrow, and Sandrush Drober, Ferroseed remained excellent. While it wasn't an unwavering wall against the biggest threats, it was superb at leveraging its resistance-laden typing into switch-in opportunities from which it could effectively support its team. What Ferroseed did wall was opposing walls. It particularly punished the presence of the popular Hippopotas with pleasure, as well as others like Bronzor and bulky variants of Gligar and Porygon. There is an item of interest to Little Cup that was at play here. Thanks to the mechanics of playing at level 5, Ferroseed could actually effectively use special attacks, despite packing an utterly pitiful base special attack stat. This translated it to using Giga Drain as its grass stab, which was invaluable for providing it with some form of recovery. The tiny HP stats in Little Cup meant Leech Seed would be of almost no help as a recovery option. Now, some players experimented with Leech Seed, especially alongside Protect, but it was still more of an offensive option. Of course, Ferroseed did sometimes want a harder hitting grass stab, and so it often went with another option that hit surprisingly hard as a result of level 5 mechanics, even harder than Seed Bomb. In fact, Bullet Seed, whose multi-hit nature also gave it the benefit of blasting through substitutes, and Tortuga's Sturdy. Ferroseed could even run a move Ferrothorn would never dream of, Thunderbolt. This had several important targets: Murkrow when it was allowed, Drifloon, and Natu. So was another move commonly seen in Ferroseed's arsenal, Thunderwave. Ferroseed's presence in the metagame was felt around every corner, forcing many threats to adapt specifically to it. It stuffed Shell Smashers like Clamperl, Ammonite, Shelder, and Tortuga if they didn't run Hidden Power Fire, but then running HP Fire would cripple their coverage for just one Pokemon, yet they were forced to do so or limit their team further by necessitating a Magnemite pairing if they didn't want to be fully walled. Ferroseed was also reliable as a hazard setter since it completely dominated Rapid Spin Staryu, ensuring it could get hazards, keep them up, and set them up repeatedly in its face. In fact, one of the most famous Little Cup dilemmas was Pokemon being forced to choose between Hidden Power Fire and Fighting. They wanted the former for Ferroseed and the latter for Pawniard, and both were similarly crucial. So all in all, Ferroseed had a great initial generation of Little Cup, helping define and defend against much of the tier. Ferroseed did lose 2 of its useful resistances in Generation 6, as Steel no longer resisted Dark and Ghost, but it also gained a new useful resistance, as it resisted the new Fairy type, which it could also hit super effectively with its Stab Gyro Ball. It promised great pairing with these Fairy types as well, since not only did Fairies resist Dark, but Ferroseed could switch in on opposing Steel moves at them. And furthermore, the proliferation of the previously rare Poison type attacks like Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb that also hit Fairies super effectively meant Ferroseed could utilize its immunity to them in ways it had not yet. Finally, Ferroseed was now effectively immune to sleep, as grass types were no longer affected by the likes of Spore and Sleep Powder. All in all, Ferroseed's defensive utility had a ton of promise for the new generation, and seemed like that would carry it in case the whole hazard stacking thing didn't quite work out in the face of the newly buffed Defog. So how did all this work out in practice? That famous power creep meant Ferroseed wasn't going to be able to reprise its excellent niche in RU, let alone in UU, but it made itself comfortable and downright elite in its new home of NU. It delivered on the defensive front. As always, it was superb at stifling several of the metagame's most powerful threats. As always, it was amazing against the enormous host of water types in the tier, including the most dangerous among them in Barbaracle, Samurott, Kabutops, and Ludicolo, and the more defensive ones like Prinplup were just absolutely helpless against it. Most defensive Pokemon were taken advantage of by Ferroseed in general, with Clefairy, Mawile, and Mega Audino being the most prominent examples. Ferroseed made a great defensive pairing with Waters itself thanks to their synergy in devouring each other's weaknesses, and if its water-type teammate was a Heal Bell Lantern, even Scald Burns wouldn't be enough to bring it down. Ferroseed wasn't just an anti-water Pokemon either. It shut down the otherwise dangerous Kangaskhan with ease, was quite a good check to Archeops, resisted Swellow's massive Boom Burst, and completely stonewalled one of the most elite Pokemon in the tier, Vileplume. But how did Ferroseed actually threaten the opposing team? Its entire gambit was its reliability in instantly setting up hazards, but that wasn't quite the case here. It wasn't because of the fog, not at all, as the fogger's lack of longevity and poor matchups against Ferroseed itself, as well as other stealth rockers Ferroseed was often paired with, so it could focus just on spiking, meant Ferroseed could outlast them quite easily. Nope, the problem was the big bad magic bounce Xatu that punished hazard use as hard as was possible in the game of Pokemon just by switching in. This was especially problematic as Xatu was one of the best, most popular Pokemon in NU, and Ferroseed wasn't anywhere near strong enough to threaten it at all. However, it didn't need to do so itself. The removal of Xatu was critical for a great deal of other top tier Pokemon, such as fighting types, and as such Pursuit was a common move for this exact purpose. It could thus easily be extended to a form of support for Ferroseed too. Ferroseed could even help its pursuing teammate out with Knockoff, which would expand Xatu's potential Cobra Berry or remove a crippling Rocky Helmet. Knockoff was of course a great move on Ferroseed in general too, as it ensured its passive damage would possess a greater, more instantly affecting and long-term enduring sting. Ferroseed's moveset generally had a lot of flexibility. It also had an easy time accentuating the obnoxiousness of its Leech Seed antics with Protect, which additionally carried the benefit of scouting hidden power fires that Pokemon might be trying to lure it with. That summarized a significant portion of Ferroseed's impact on the metagame, forcing HP fire and thus compromising opponents' movesets, since the move was otherwise just about useless on Pokemon like Samurott. And so Ferroseed was an outstanding, defining Pokemon in Gen 6 NU. Ferroseed returned for another round of Little Cup, quickly establishing itself as a formidable presence within the metagame once again. Not only did it counter the enormous plethora of water types within the tier, it also utilized its auspicious typing to pivot around some of the most dangerous Pokemon around. For example, its useful Psychic Resist let it switch into Abra Stab before pivoting into something else to take a far weaker hidden power. Ferroseed also benefited greatly from the presence of Spritzee. Not only did the two beautifully resist each other's weaknesses, Spritzee leveraged this further by passing wishes to keep Ferroseed healthy. This was especially appreciated since Ferroseed preferred Bullet Seed as its stab in this generation for sturdy Onix and Shell Smashers, as well as the newly popular threatening Substitute or Focus Sash Abra. Ferroseed was also excellent at utilizing the newly buffed Knockoff to remove opposing Eviolites, supporting its team even further. Of course, it had to be wary of losing its own Eviolite in the face of opposing knockoffs, but it was still quite defensively apt even if it did lose it. Plus, Iron Barbs ensured that an opposing knockoff landing on it would still be punished. Knockoff also had the excellent benefit of dealing with Magnemite, who often ran sets without hidden power fire. Finally, the Ferroseed and Pawniard combination came into its own in this generation. In addition to the hidden power fire versus fighting split they forced opponents into, Pawniard's Defiant ability punished opposing attempts to defog away Ferroseed's hazards. Ferroseed was a reliable pillar of many successful teams all throughout the 6th generation of Little Cup, establishing itself further as one of the smallest metagame's best, most defining Pokemon. Ferroseed couldn't quite repeat its metagame defining excellence in the Generation 7's iteration of NU. Power creep is the downfall of most fully evolved Pokemon and even legendary Pokemon, let alone not fully evolved ones. However, even in the face of this giant toppling phenomenon that increased NU's power level, Ferroseed was still a great Pokemon. As always, its great typing gave it plenty of popular Pokemon it could wall, and thus plenty of opportunities to set up its trademark spikes. With Gen 7 nerfing burn damage to a paltry 6.25% per turn, Ferroseed had an even easier time switching in and continuing to be useful against popular bulky waters like Vaporeon. Incidentally, Vaporeon was also a great Ferro partner, since its enormous wishes would effortlessly heal Ferrothorn back to full HP. This great matchup against waters also extended to Ferroseed's usefulness against one of the most popular hazard removers, Blastoise, and it was similarly excellent against the likes of Delmise, making it a thoroughly reliable hazard setter. It wasn't just good against passive walls either, though it did often make them rue their existence. It also was excellent against several popular offensive threats like Togedemaru, Aerodactyl, and Heliolisk. And so Ferroseed was a valuable, reliable choice in NU once again. That said, it was more specific than it had been before, and its usage was lower as a result. Therefore, it fell to the PU tier. To nobody's surprise, it absolutely thrived in that tier's low power environment. With the metagame as populated as it was by normals, waters, grasses, and electrics, Ferroseed was an outstanding wall. In one way or another, it checked or countered an enormous majority of the metagame. Its incredible resistances on full display, game after game. As always, it continued its hazard stacking excellence with advantageous matchups against against common hazard removers in Alolan Sandslash and Cryogonal, thus becoming a critical part of many successful teams' defensive backbone and hazard core. As tended to be the case, even the few Pokemon that could actually threaten Ferroseed didn't much like switching into it. Sure, it had to run fire and fighting types, but they absolutely loathed switching into its Leech Seed, especially with hazards up. As always, directly dealing with Ferroseed proved quite challenging, which made it an incredibly consistent choice. And so Ferroseed had a tremendous debut in its inaugural PU appearance. Much of how Ferroseed played in Generation 6 Lil Cup was applicable to its similarly excellent role in Generation 7. However, there were of course differences. Some players, wanting to increase Ferroseed's longevity without running Giga Drain or pairing it with a Wish user, experimented with Berry Juice as its item. It no longer took hits as a wall, but it was more effectively able to stick around to set up hazards throughout the game. Eviolite remained the standard, however, giving Ferroseed crucial defensive utility against the tier's hard hitters. For example, being able to withstand 2 of Mudray's massively powerful Earthquake while shrugging off the dangerous Staryu with ease. Ferroseed also received an absolutely incredible new defensive partner in Marini. Just like the unforgiving Ferropex combination in OU, Ferroseed and Marini stuffed an enormous portion of the tier and spread crippling passive damage with ease. It sure was difficult to be a water type of any kind in Little Cup, but especially if you wanted to use your water typing for offense, Ferroseed was always there, ruining your fun. Of course, Ferroseed was also one of the best partners for water types too. So as always, Ferroseed quietly helped make Little Cup what it was, with its ever-reliable defensive and utility presence. Generation 8's removal of Hidden Power Fire was incredible for Ferroseed, removing the forced HP fires that so many Pokemon tacked on. Of course, Generation 8 also brought about the hazard-ignoring heavy-duty boots, but thanks to Ferroseed's trusty knockoff, that was quite a manageable obstacle. In early Gen 8 RU, Ferroseed carved out a solid niche. The focus on fire and fighting-type offense from staples including but not limited to Charizard, Ninetales, Salazzle, Virizion, and Passimian meant that, for the first time ever, it wasn't doing much in the way of walling offensive threats. However, it flawlessly exploited the presence of passive opposing walls like Steelix, Vileplume, and Vaporeon, completely stuffing them and punishing them with spikes, which were amongst the most reliable ways to beat them long term. Alternatively, it could use the free turns these walls afforded for an easy knockoff, which was assured to remove a valuable opposing item. Strangely, it was almost more of an offensive Pokemon. Almost anyway. In early NU, Ferroseed was once again the trusty wall everyone had known it to be for so long. It helped take on huge threats like Basculin, Magneton, Kangaskhan, while retaining its tried and true role of being a spiker that dominated anti-hazard method. In this case, beating Eldegoss one-on-one and easily outlasting Silvally forms through its incredibly spammable Leech Seed. In addition to Leech Seed being a surprisingly reliable substitute for leftovers and keeping it healthy, it also made for an excellent pairing with another Eviolite wall that kept its HP high, Wish Teleport Clefairy. The strategy was as reliable and irritating as it was when used on the 2 evolved forms in OU. Ferroseed's NU excellence continued through the Isle of Armor, and though the metagame around it changed, it continued doing its thing more or less unperturbed. Previously, in terms of offensive waters, it checked Basculin. Now it checks Cramorant instead. It also was excellent at checking several top-tier additions to the metagame, most notably Rabombi and Whimsicott, while also helping against Clawitzer, Duraludon, and even Rotom. Spikes were as strong as ever during the period, if not stronger. This illusion with the hazard removing options that Ferroseed destroyed anyway. Players preferred stacking up on Boots Pokemon, but this only brought about an illusion of security in the team builder that Ferroseed would then shatter in the battle with effortless knockoff spam, allowing its spikes to continue on their merry way. Ferroseed's Iron Bars are also invaluable for getting chip damage that was otherwise massively difficult to obtain against the tier-dominating Ninjask and its U-turn. The Crown Tundra came along and Power Creep did its thing, sending Ferroseed to PU. There it excelled once again. Several familiar faces had tumbled down to the tier with it, and thus Ferroseed gleefully took advantage of the presence of the Rabombi, Magneton, Togedemaru, Eldegoss, and Whimsicott it did so well against, as well as shutting down new faces in Gigalith and Mesprit. Even Pokemon that it didn't exactly hard counter, it still did incredibly well in checking, such as Archeops and Dual Blade. Spikes were incredible for wearing down the tier's bulky staples like Jellicent and Quagsire, making Ferroseed excellent support for offensive Pokemon that could struggle to break them, as did Ferroseed's well-targeted knockoff that removed heavy-duty boots galore. Even something like Centiskorch or Charizard wouldn't want to switch into it as a result, making Ferroseed even more obnoxious to play around. And to this day, Ferroseed is one of the very best Pokemon in Generation 8 PU. The removal of hidden power was especially incredible for Ferroseed and Little Cup. Now it completely, safely walled Staryu and Porygon, who no longer possessed the capacity to hit it super effectively. Ferroseed also loved taking advantage of hidden power Fireless Fungus, as well as once again stifling Marini, turning roadblocks to its offensive teammates into opportunities for it to spread knockoff, Thunder Wave, or even stack spikes in the event it was paired with a different stealth rocker. Finally, Ferroseed was a superb wall for the popular Focus Sash Abra variants that didn't run Fire Punch. Occasionally, Ferroseed slotted Explosion into its moveset to escape being setup fodder for the substitute Charge Beam Select-Berry Magnemite, which would otherwise often sweep. This Magnemite set briefly took over the metagame and made running the otherwise reliable Ferroseed a game-losing liability, but eventually good players caught on to the concept of simply not breaking the sub so as to not allow Magnemite the speed boost, meaning they didn't have to run Boom. That said, Explosion was also nice to not be set up fodder for Belly Drum Magby and Swords Dance Grookey. Gen A did also remove Pursuit, which meant Ferroseed had a tougher time if it faced off against Natu, but then again, Natu didn't enjoy taking Ferroseed's knockoff. Beyond these top tier Pokemon it reliably went toe to toe with, Ferroseed was typically excellent against such an enormous range of other offensive threats from Carvanha to Tyrant. It could mix and match to its heart's desire, it could even run Revenge of all moves to destroy Poniard and Magnemite, and all the while supporting his teammates through Hazards, Knockoff, and Thunder Wave. And so Ferroseed was one of the Little Cup metagame's most elite, defining Pokemon once again. And that's it. So how good was Ferroseed actually? Well, it has been an elite lower tier and Little Cup Pokemon ever since its inception. It's not exactly like running Ferrothorn in those tiers, but it sure is a close approximation. And that makes for a uniquely excellent Pokemon that significantly shapes whatever tier it winds up in. So all in all, Ferroseed is one of the greatest pre-evolutions of all time and has had an incredible competitive career, better than that of many fully evolved and legendary Pokemon. And now it's surely just a matter of time before some genius runs Ferrothorn and Ferroseed on the same team and changes the game of Pokemon entirely. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Ferroseed? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments, and of course, thank you to our patrons for continued support of our videos and for voting for Ferroseed for this month's patron pick. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.